This is a pain de poisson à la mousse de crevette. And this is the sauce parisienne that goes with it. They both begin with shrimp. Today, on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we're going to do this absolutely beautiful mousse. It's a shrimp mousse and it's called a pain de poisson à la mousse de crevette. Crevettes are shrimp in French. And then this sauce to go with it, this beautiful, beautiful, delicious, creamy sauce is called a sauce parisienne. And we're going to use every single part of the shrimp when we do this. As you will see, even the shells, because that's a very French way of doing things. And here we have, these are defrosted, headless shrimp. But as you see, shrimps do have heads, and if you are lucky enough to get fresh ones, you would have the head too, and that would be even nicer. As it is, we just have the tail part here. I suppose that not many people realize that they can use the whole part of the shrimp and get a lot of flavor. And when you are going to use shrimp for anything, if you can't get fresh ones, be very, very careful that you get the freshest smelling frozen shrimp that there are. And I think it's awfully hard sometimes to tell unless you, but when you smell the box or smell the shrimp, they should smell absolutely sweet. They really shouldn't have any smell at all. They should just, if they smell shrimpy or fishy, don't buy them. And for heaven's sakes, don't ever buy thawed frozen shrimp in the supermarket. Buy them solidly. And I find that peeling them, I don't seem to be doing very well on this one, I find that I like to peel them by hand. Some people do like shrimp shellers. I never seem to be able to work them very well. And I find the best thing to do without shrimp shellers is to start on the soft underbelly where the feet are here, and then just pull that apart. And these are raw shrimp. And I don't think cooked shrimp come very often in the shell. No, I keep putting the wrong thing in. This is like opening eggs. And then after you've got your shrimp shelled, I think it's a good idea to wash them to get off the preservative, which sometimes is on them. So wash the shrimp and wash the shells. And we're going to use both of them, but the shrimp are going to be ground. And I have about 2 pounds of shrimp, and I'm going to put them through the grinder. I find that, though I've tried the blender, I find that for grinding shrimp, that the meat grinder is really much better because I think it sticks up in the blender. And these are the shrimp that I'm using here are large, medium. That's about 26 to a pound. So you want 2 pounds to make about 2.5 cups of ground shrimp. And see how sticky that is, which is just what we want. And any bits that are left in the grinder, take them all out of the grinder and put all the bits into your little group of shells, because that's going to give a lot more flavor to your sauce, and we'll use all of that. And then put the rest in a big bowl with ice. And then we're going to start making the mousse with it. And the mousse is French, meaning something that's foamy. And so anything that's a mousse is foamy, light, creamy, and delicious. And what's wonderful with shrimp, which I think makes them quite unique, is that they are so gelatinous that you can beat a lot of cream in. So I'm going to start, this is some of this nice heavy creme fraiche, homemade, and you just start beating it in. I've got about 2.5 cups of shrimp, and that will take about 2 cups of cream. And the reason this is on ice is because when it's cold, it will absorb more cream. And the more cream you can make it absorb, the moussier and more delicate and delicious it will be. In the old days, it was just a real problem to make one of these things. You had to pound it all up in a mortar and then pass it through a sieve, and it took you just about all day. But with the modern meat grinder and electric mixer, it's just marvelous, I think. Now these 2.5 cups of pureed shrimp will take probably 2 cups of heavy cream. I'm going to have to stop. This is such a big container, it's a little slippery. I'll put a little bit more cream in. Now we want to look at the consistency here. You add just as much cream as the mousse will take and still hold its shape. You see, it still is holding its shape, so I could still add a little bit more cream. So I will, and put in just a little bit more. Beat it up a little bit more. Now I'm going to see how that consistency is again. You see this is really very easy to make. It's much easier to make than most things that are called force meats. See that still holding its shape on the spatula, so it's perfectly all right. So this is called, if you're reading escoffier, it's called sometimes force meat, and some people call it fish paste, which I think is hardly a nice thing to call it. But you have to do what you feel is proper. But I call it either a mousse. I call it a mousse. And now it should have some salt in. About 3/4 of a teaspoon is about right. And a little bit of pepper. And that should be white pepper. That doesn't look white, but it is. So that it won't make too many black specks. Though even if it does have some black specks, people would think maybe that was truffle, which would be fine. A little bit of nutmeg, just a little petit pointe, as they say, because nobody should be able to taste it and say, oh, nutmeg. However, if you did use truffles, you would omit the nutmeg. And this makes it just about 5 cups. And now, just as it is, you can use it to make a little ramekin, a little individual ramekin like this. This is just a little custard cup, and you just fill it right up. And then you bake it just exactly like a custard in a pan of water in the oven, and would bake just about 15 minutes until it had just begun to shrink from the pan, and then it's all done. And you can serve it with a lovely sauce and what could be simpler, and also it's a very elegant thing. However, you can be much fancier than that, and that is going to be the fish, the mousse assembled in a big pan. And here we have a buttered bread pan, and that's a 2-quart one. And you are going to, see what we're going to have here. We have some fish fillets that are going to go into it. And we have also some asparagus. And then we have our mousse. Now the pan is heavily buttered, and then you want a buttered piece of paper in the bottom of it. That's just for ease in unmolding later on. And then you put a layer of mousse in the bottom of the pan. You put quite a bit in first. Remember that you want to save enough mousse because it's all going to go into layers all around. And you can see why you don't want to put too much cream in, because if you did, the mousse wouldn't stay up the sides of the pan. And that's about, say, 1/4 of an inch around the sides of the pan. But be sure, or in other words, about a third of your mousse will go in. You rather make up according to what you have. And then in go the fish fillets. And these are nice flounders, and if they're a little bit too big, you can cut a piece off. They just lay in there, and these can be perfectly plain, but have macerated them in just a few drops of cognac and a little salt and pepper and shallot. You don't have to turn it over. That's quite all right. And then put a little bit of mousse on top. It would be too bad not to put any kind of wine or something in it, and just those few drops of cognac are very nice. And then on top of this, there's just a little bit of mousse there to separate the layers, and then on top of that goes the asparagus. And this is just cooked asparagus, the tenderest part of it. And lay it in very neatly. That's got a little curl in it. That isn't very neat. I'll take that off. And then I'm not going to do all of that, but you get the idea. And you keep building it up in layers until you get a whole, that's your second layer of asparagus, and then put another layer, thin layer of mousse on that, and then some more fish fillets and some more mousse. There's some more of that fish. And this you rather play by eye. And there's more mousse. This is a very French type of thing, of making different kinds of different layers in a pan of something that, as I've often said before, something that's really basically quite simple. You see, when you have, this is an 8-cup pan here, and we had about 5 cups of mousse, and so you have to end up with 3 cups of something else. And then on top of this, lay a piece of buttered paper. And this you can do ahead of time and put it in the refrigerator, but I think that you should cook it just about as soon as you can, because shrimp is very, very, very perishable, and as soon as it has been thawed, or if it's fresh, as soon as it's been caught, you really should use it just about immediately if you want to get it so that it's absolutely delicious. And now this goes into a 350-degree oven when you're ready to bake it, and it goes into a pan of water, and the water should come halfway up. This is called a bain-marie, and then the water should cook at the very bare simmer, and it should bake for about 40 to 60 minutes. And while it's cooking, we're going to make the sauce. Because actually, if you're going to make a really high-class dish like this, it would be unthinkable not to have a sauce with it. And besides, we got all these shrimp shells, so you have to do something about it. And with these, whatever sauce you were going to make, you could use these shrimp shells to make what is known a fumée de poisson, or a very concentrated white wine fish stock. And in this pan, I have some cooked onions and carrots. to give a little flavor to the sauce. And then you stir the shrimp shells around in the pan until they begin to turn pink. That takes about a minute or two, and stand right over it because you don't want them to burn, but you want them to absorb the butter in which the vegetables were cooked. You can see they're just beginning to turn a little bit pink now. So just stand right over and stir it. You can see if you had your fresh shrimps and you still had the heads would be in here, and that would give it even more flavor. And then if you happen to have a little fish stock, you would add it, and if you don't, add some bottled clam juice, which is an excellent substitute for fish stock. We're very lucky to have it available. And then also a little white wine, and if you don't have white wine, use dry white French vermouth, which is an excellent substitute, about 2/3 cup. I don't think I really put 2/3 cup in there, because that's all going to boil away. And then add a little bit of water too, and because in this case you had clam juice, you don't need any salt in it. And then put in some herbs, put in a bay leaf and a little bit of thyme, and just let that simmer. And when you're done, you have there's your ready stock right in there. And with this, you could boil it down and use it instead of lemon juice for a hollandaise. But what we're going to do is to make a sauce veloutée, which is a fish sauce, which starts out with a roux. And your fish stock would simmer about 40 minutes to get all of the flavor out of it. And you can cover it or not, as you wish. But when it's done, you're then ready to start out your roux, which is a flour and butter thickening for the sauce. You want about 3 tablespoons of butter there, and 4 tablespoons of flour. And it's the flour that gives you the thickness for your sauce. So you want to be, we want about 2 cups of sauce. And so you need 4 tablespoons of flour and 3 of butter, and you need just enough butter so that you can make this flour butter paste, which then has to cook. And this is a terribly important part of sauce making, French sauce making at least, is that you always cook a flour and butter roux so that you cook the flour. And if you don't do that, your sauce tastes awful. And that's why very often you hear people who deplore the use of flour in sauces. It just means they don't know how to cook a sauce. So if you run into a recipe for a white sauce or a bechamel and it says melt the butter, stir in the flour, pour in the liquid, you cook it first for just about 2 minutes, and you'll find that it makes a great deal of difference. In other words, you can correct a bad recipe when you see it and use the useful parts of it. And then after that is cooked, and it should be just a nice butter color for about 2 minutes, you're ready to put in the stock. And the stock is warm, and you can just pour it right in. And pour in a little bit at first and see how it is. And then you can add more if you need to, but with one of these sauces it's best always to add a little bit at first, because you can always thin it out, but it's hard to thicken it up. Now this is going to be even better because I'm going to use the juices from the mousse that is cooked. And as you will see, the mousse has exuded some delicious juice. And that's just going to go also into the sauce. So this is a very typical French cooking. You don't throw away anything. It's all good and all used. Now look at, there's, you can tell how the mousse is done because it has shrunk from the sides of the pan. And it also feels, it's not squashy. So you put a cover over the pan and drain those juices right in. And it's amazing how how much juice it has. I seem to be spilling all over. But it's surprising how much juice there is. So you just have to keep pouring. And then this mousse also has to rest for about 10 or 15 minutes before you unmold it. And that gives you time to finish your sauce. So you set that over heat, and you let that cook slowly until it is thickened up nicely and reduced. And here is how it looks when it's done. It's thickened up quite nicely. And this is now what you would call a basic sauce, just a fish velouté, which means a flour and butter roux with a fish stock in it. But now we're going to turn it into one of the great sauces called a sauce parisienne. And that means that you put some cream and egg yolks in it. And this was and here we've got 2 egg yolks here. And you have to put a little bit of cream in, not a great deal. You can always add more later. And then you want to beat in a little bit of your hot sauce, just a little tiny bit, so that you can heat the egg yolks gradually. If you poured the just naked egg yolks into a hot sauce, they would scramble like scrambled eggs. So that's why you always put a little cold liquid like cream with the egg yolks. Then you add a little bit of the hot sauce to heat them up, and then they're not going to scramble. And then you pour the egg yolkery and creamery back into your former fish velouté, and then you set it over heat, and you want to just bring it just to the bare simmer, and let it simmer for about a minute or two. And that is going to bind the egg yolk so that sauce is not going to curdle. And this is, when you have a sauce like this velouté, it has the flour in it, and the flour prevents the egg yolks from curdling if you treat it this way, that is of beating it with your cream and then beating in the hot sauce gradually and then heating it. And also remember this, there are so many sauces that are made exactly this way. This was, it used to be called a sauce allemande, or German sauce, and after World War II, Escoffier didn't like the idea of calling it that, so he called it a sauce parisienne, but it is one of the classic sauces. And now we want to taste it and just see how it is. That's very nice, but I think it's going to be improved with the addition of a little lemon. Rather than using an impeccably clean towel, I will squeeze it through a squeezer. I don't know as I like that as well, but I have to change sometimes. And then if it needs a little more salt and pepper, add it now. And if you found, for instance, that it didn't have quite enough strength, you could add a little more fish stock to it or a little more wine and boil it down and give it exactly the right taste that you want. And then to make it even fancier, so this is rather like a hollandaise but not quite as rich, just at the very last minute before serving, you beat in a little enrichment butter. And this you can beat in exactly as much butter as you like. You could just go on and on, beating in half a pound. I'm just putting in a little bit to show you how it is. Now we have some shrimp decorations and are now ready to unmold el musso. There's a lightly buttered platter and a sauce dish and a juice bowl, because if I know my mousse, there's going to be still some more juice there. Yep, there you are, a little more. And then after it's unmolded even, there'll probably be a little more juice, and that's why I have a bulb baster. Now, ready to unmold. Turn the platter upside down. There she is. And the paper's adhered to the bottom. I guess it's not on the top. No, maybe I didn't put any paper in that. Well, anyway, it unmolded nicely. And now these little shrimp I think are nice for decoration. Because then when it comes in, people know that you have made a shrimp mousse. You can put on, I think this mousse will probably serve, depends on whether you had it as a main course or a first course. For a first course, it would certainly serve 8, I think. And then your sauce, put some sauce around, neatly, if possible. See, if you hadn't taken the juices out, you'd have an awful lot of juices in that pan. And then with an impeccably clean little towel, wipe any spillies off, and there you are, ready to go. Sorry to say, I didn't put the sauce in. Now here is this little simple tambal, the one that was just a little plain shrimpy mousse with nothing else in it. And then here is le pain de poisson. And I'm going to cut it so you can see what it looks like. All that asparagus, I didn't cut that very neatly. But very often they don't cut neatly. And for wine, this is the kind of dish where you can serve really your greatest white wine, like a Montrachet. So just see what you can do when you begin with shrimp. Aided and abetted by flounders and asparagus and a bit of heavy cream from the bottom of the ocean to the top of the table. There you are, with a pain de poisson à la mousse de crevette. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
This program was made possible by a grant from Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is the author of From Julia Child's Kitchen, which includes the recipes from this program.